Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk About, the show where I ramble on about various video game topics. And today's subject is storytelling in video games. Now, storytelling has always been a very important aspect of video games for me. I love stories, whether they're from books, movies, TV shows, plays, musicals, whatever. I just love hearing all sorts of different kinds of tales. And I think video games are one of the most unique ways of telling stories, just because the player can be completely immersed in the world and the characters and stuff, and when it's done right, it can be an experience unlike any other form of media. And that's why I just love games that have great stories in them. They mean so much to me as a person who loves this world of all these video game adventures. In fact, even back in the early days of video gaming, I have fond memories playing on my Sega Genesis, and I was playing games like Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and I would make up dialogue for the characters as I was like doing boss fights and the little like mini cutscenes they had in them. They're completely silent, but in my child brain, I just love making, fleshing out the story even more from what I knew from the manuals and stuff, and I was ecstatic as the video games progressed, and we got better and better ways of telling the stories and the world, and we got big cutscenes, voice acting, some of which may have not been the greatest when it's first started out, but we've come a long way, so that's awesome too. And it's just been incredible, really, just to see the evolution of storytelling in games. And some of them from the first Phantasy Star were really good for its time, I think. And we've just progressed from there, so that's really awesome. And story, I think, is bigger than ever now in video games, which is something that I really love about all the newer games that have been coming out over the past decade. One of which, I have to give a couple examples, I love the Xenosaga trilogy, all the characters and philosophical themes it has, and it's just really interesting to me. I love games like that, and great dramas like The Last of Us, that they're difficult to play through in some ways, just because the story can be so heart-wrenching, but it's an adventure you will never forget once you've played all the way through it. There's just been so many great games with great stories. Some of them, of course, better than others, but in general, I've loved all the games that have come out. And most of them have the traditional form of storytelling, you'll have a level or a segment that the player just plays through, and then there'll be a cutscene or two to kind of flesh out the story mode. But lately, I love some of the changes that we've had in games. I do love minimalist storytelling as well. Games like the Dark Souls series and Shadow of the Colossus have this type of storytelling where they give you little bits of opening story and that kind of stuff, but most of the story you kind of have to piece together yourself, whether it's through item descriptions or just the world itself. I also love that kind of storytelling as well, because it has a much more air of mystery to it, and you as the player and the community has to try to figure out what is going on in this particular video game world, and that is something that's always lots of fun to figure out. And the biggest aspect of stories particularly in the last couple of years have been popularized by Telltale in particular, in games like Mass Effect from BioWare, is player choice in games, because this allows the player to kind of really role play their character in the story in any way they would like to. Gives them different dialogue options, different option selects in various story scenarios, and it really just allows them to experience the story the way they want to. And that kind of stuff really just blows my mind, but I completely love it. I can't imagine as a writer, how much work that takes to try to get all these different dialogue trees and different scenarios and outcomes and how they all take effect. So that stuff is really amazing, and I've loved games like that. Because you can just spend hours figuring out all the way different stories can go. And while sometimes the choices may not have a huge effect on the game as a whole, when they do, it's really, really staggering to try to figure all the different story arcs you can try to play through. So as you can probably tell, I really love games that are story driven or have a huge element of story in them, even to other titles like fighting games and horror titles, or MOBAs even, like games that you don't normally like associate big story elements with, but for me in particular, they really sell the experience. Like, I know I love fighting games in general, but like sometimes I love to hear more about the different characters and their backstories, and that only just makes me more intrigued in the playing that character in actual matches. And then the same goes with MOBAs and stuff. Like, I loved reading like the lore of characters in games like League of Legends, figuring out who their rivals were, where they came from. There are so many games that have great stories in them that I love. There would be far too many to list. I might have to do a favorite 5 someday of some of my favorite video game stories. But I just, ever since I first started playing video games, it's something about the video game world that has captured my imagination. Just being able to play through these interactive landscapes and imaginative enemies, great characters, and then they just add great dialogue and fantastic stories to go with them. It just made it an even greater experience. And with video games becoming more and more mainstream as the medium progresses, it'll be cool to see what kind of new and experimental ways we can tell stories in video games, and that just completely capture the player. So, storytelling in video games. What's your favorite kind of tale? Do you like minimalistic stories, choices with stories with them, or more straightforward ones like Metal Gear Solid? Or do you enjoy all the above? Because I know I sure do. Thank you for watching this episode of Let's Talk About. If you have any ideas for future subjects or ideas for me to talk about in the show, please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave a like. Until next time, keep having great adventures, everyone.